pressing the on button always makes a huge difference. Great. So, good morning. It is such a pleasure and an honor to be here. Thank you very much. So, as Boaz says, I am a highly accredited person. I teach a course here at Harvard called Reweaving Ourselves and the World, Reimagining Leadership in a World on Fire. It enrolls graduate students from all the professional schools at Harvard, including FAS, except dentistry. But that means we have lawyers and business people and government people and urban planners and mobility school students, and it is amazing. Well, the students are amazing. Whether the class is amazing, you should ask them. The class is about the intersection between system change and inner transformation. I have come to believe that we will not change the world we're in without profound change at the individual level. And that is a sufficiently unusual sentiment for someone whose undergraduate degree is in engineering from MIT and whose PhD is in neoclassical economics from Harvard and who taught at business schools, has taught at business schools for over 35 years. But I thought that is what I would talk about. Why inner transformation? Why is it so important? So I thought I would tell you a little bit about how I came to this belief. I grew up in England. You can probably tell I have the trace of an accent. I grew up in London to a troubled family. So troubled that I spent large portions of my adolescence outside, a lot of them lying in a great beech tree with a huge lower limb. I don't know if any of you have been in England or in the South, seen these huge trees. I could lie on my back on this beautiful bough and look up through the leaves and see the sunlight and hear the tree and smell the spring. And lying there, I felt connected and peaceful and at rest. And then I would get up and go back into the house and deal with the stuff in the house. And so as I grew up, I had two worlds. I had the world of the house and the world of outside. And I loved being outside, but it never occurred to me that was a place one could live or move from. I knew I had to learn to operate in the house. I learned that I had to make sure that what was happening to my mother never, ever happened to me. And so I got very interested in power. I went to MIT. I studied engineering. I went to McKinsey, one of the world's greatest consulting companies. I studied why large firms couldn't change. I told you I was British. This is England in the early 80s. I was working with firms with 200-year-old brand names that could not, would not change. I came to Harvard to do an MBA and a PhD in economics and spent the first 20 years of my career at MIT studying change in large organizations. I became the Eastman Kodak Professor of Management, which was deeply ironic given that all my scholarly research was about how and why firms could not, would not change. It was coincidence that I became the Kodak Professor of Management, and pure coincidence that the year Kodak went bankrupt, I moved to Harvard. I came to Harvard to help start a center on business and environment. At MIT, I had become persuaded that keeping my life outside and my life in the house separate was a mistake. That I needed to help address the problems that we faced. I was one of the people radicalized by Al Gore's movie, for those of you old enough to remember. I helped launch the first course in sustainability at MIT. And I was recruited to Harvard by the dean with the immortal lines, this was 2009, Rebecca, we missed the climate crisis, we missed the financial crisis. It's your job to make sure we don't miss the climate crisis. As you can tell, I didn't do a very good job. But I came to HBS to work on the climate crisis. I founded a course called Reimagining Capitalism in a World on Fire. It became the fastest growing elective course at the business school in 15 years. 300 students, massively successful. The dean asked me to take it into the first year, so I became the course head for the required ethics course. We had a course on ethics and leadership. I brought in structural ethics. You can be good to the people around you, you can be a moral person, but if you're in a fundamentally immoral system, if you are contributing to the breakdown of the world's ecosystems and to the propagation of inequality and racial inequity, that is not moral. How should we think about that? And I wrote a book called Reimagining Capitalism in a World on Fire. It came out in April 2020. Anyone remember April 2020? I thought the book would disappear without a trace. My book tour, which we had so painstakingly planned, disappeared. I thought, well, that's it. It was nice. It was good. But it turned out to be a great time to publish a book called Reimagining Capitalism in a World on Fire. Fabulous. The first big Zoom I did had 20,000 HBS alumni. That was before we all got, a bit bored of Zoom. The book went into 7 languages. It was on the bestsellers list in Japan and South Korea. Big sales in South America, in Africa, in Europe, not so much in the US. It was a huge success. Everything that I could have dreamt of. I got into every room I wanted to be in. All the rich and the powerful, with leading business people, with people with the money, I was right there. Fantastic. And I became very clear. I had made a mistake. I made a fundamental mistake. I had thought, if you wrote a book laying out the business case for not crashing the ecosystem and treating people with dignity and respect, and you explained in painstaking detail how the data supported you in running your firm in a very different kind of way, purpose-driven, with a focus on human flourishing rather than on making money for its own sake, if you ran your firm that way, if you collaborated with other firms in the industry to bring down your carbon emissions and address the fundamental issues, if you worked with business, with other people in business, to build a strong democracy that gave you the regulations you needed to support firms like this, if you laid all that out in beautiful prose, or the best I could manage, with great stories of real people, because it has to be about stories, and you explained how it all added up, that somehow everyone would go, Rebecca, what? We were waiting for you. What were we thinking? Of course. A basic narcissistic error, may I say. But also an intellectual mistake. Because I have spent 20 years studying change in large organizations. And I knew that simply explaining to people what they should do because there was money to be made and really they should do it, and it was a bit difficult, but go ahead and do it, it didn't work. And I knew that because I had worked with Nokia for a year, trying to persuade them that Apple was a threat. I had worked with General Motors for many years, trying to persuade them to change the way they managed the workforce with very mixed results. I knew that simply telling people intellectually this is the right thing to do does not work. And yet that was the mistake I made. And I made it because I thought the only way to get into the rooms I wanted to get into was to stay in the house, to talk about power, to talk about money, to talk about you can do this and still keep your life the way it is. So I got very depressed. You get everything you want and it's not what you want. So I quit. I quit for 2 years. Took 2 years leave of absence. I did a silent retreat every month for 2 years. That was amazing. And Boaz, to your point, the privilege to be able to do that, but it was incredible. It was amazing to learn the quiet place inside me. Now, I won't claim to be fully enlightened on any, in fact, I won't claim to be slightly enlightened. I will claim to be a little less crazy than I was. That's all I'm aiming for. And I came to believe that this turning inwards, and we know there are many ways to do it, many different pathways, but becoming fully embodied, or as embodied as I could, was absolutely critical to what needs to happen. And so I came back to Harvard and told the dean I didn't want to teach in the business school, I wanted to do something entirely new, and that's what I teach. So I'm tempted to give you a detailed rundown of the entire syllabus, but I won't. I have 5 minutes. So I will give you the 5 reasons I think we need inner transformation, and that our world will not even begin to heal without it. The first is the most basic, comes straight from my research. Every firm I knew in those first 20 years that really changed because they had a reason. Because they had a technology they wanted to get out there, or because they really cared about their employees, or because it really mattered to the community in which they were located. You can have a business case, but if you're asking people to do something difficult and hard, they need an emotional reason, they need the purpose, they need the cohesion. I always know that, and it's still true. The second reason we need inner transformation is because we need to face what's really happening. We need to break out of the trap of modernity, which is such a sweet and beautiful trap for those of us caught in it. The promise of autonomy, the promise of comfort, the promise of endless growth, the promise that we don't really have to talk to each other, that the market will take care of everything. It's such a sweet promise, and so dangerous. But if you don't have another place to go to, it's really hard to break. And the third reason you need some degree of inner awareness is because when you let the promise of modernity go, when you really focus on what's happening, if you're like me, you go into a deep depression. We are so stuck and so caught, and it has been building for hundreds of years. And, I can talk technical about climate change and ecosystem destruction, and we have a problem. It's not that we don't have the technology and resources to build a rich, flourishing world where there is enough for everyone. We absolutely do. But it means fundamental changes in our institutions, in our measures, in how we relate, in the structure of power. Whoa! You need a place to stand to hold what it means. And then the third reason you need a place to stand is because of the sense, again, for me, of grief and complicity and fear that really facing what happens brings with it. Once you're done with that, once you've begun to find a way to do the work that needs to be done and hold the knowledge that what you do is so little and so inadequate, then you need relational work and some degree of relational skills, because you go, oh, no heroes. I need everyone else. I'm just a tiny part of this. So you need to do relational work. Because when you get close to other people, it is tricky. I mean, lots of loving and hugging and lots of whoa. Intimacy is hard. Trust is hard. Really building something together is hard. We need inner work, we need inner focus because we need those skills. And last but not least, we need inner transformation, some sense of a world that is more than material, some sense of a world that is more than us, because we are not going to fix it. Not in our lifetimes. It'll never be fixed, whatever fixed is. We are going to live in a profoundly broken world. And we will be doing all we can, and it will not be enough. I used to dream when I first started meditating. I stood up at my first retreat, end of 10 days, and I said, oh, amazing technology. Impossible to scale. And I dreamed that the whole world could wake up. It's not going to happen. I was the Eastman Kodak Professor of Management. It might happen one day. It might happen on Tuesday. But as an alien outside the world, you wouldn't lay great odds. We are going to be working this problem forever. And we need the centering, we need the sense of the bigger framing, because without it, our hearts will break again and again and again and not be healed. So that sense of connection of something greater, that's where we have to stand. Thank you very much.